and I vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning. All right. Okay, this is where we are in the Amida Sutra, Zenith direction, where we left up last time. And now we're picking up on discussing the Great Flaming Shoulders Buddha. And this, so Great Flaming Shoulders Buddha represents two types of wisdom. And according to Master Ching Kong, there are two types of wisdom: true wisdom and influential wisdom. And we'll go into that just a little bit. But before that, we'd like to discuss the three different ways, according to the scriptures, of how to develop wisdom. According to the Nikaya, there are three types of knowledge or wisdom. And one is developed based on thinking, Sinta Maya. And the other is based on learning. And the third is based on mental development. Based on thinking, here is that one is acquired by one's own knowledge and studying condition without having to learn from others. So through observing nature, through observing the principles that you think about, you contemplate, and you arrive at your own understanding, and therefore you develop wisdom. The second is based on learning, and traditionally it's hearing, because back during the Buddhist day, people did not write or read. It was not very common. Mostly people learn through hearing, listening to the teachers. So therefore, this knowledge here is from hearing, listening to the Dhamma, but it is really through learning. We now know nowadays it's not only hearing, but we learned. And so this is more of a general characterization is learning. We can learn from reading, we can learn from hearing. And from this that we gain knowledge. And then the third is based on meditation or cultivation. And here it's really, it refers to meditation. And this knowledge is acquired through mental development, and which has reached the stage of attainment, concentration. We arise wisdom because we have laid a foundation through mental development, which is meditation. Meditation is the direct way of laying the ground flat, making the ground very fertile, making the ground very suitable for wisdom to arise. So in our concentrated mind, it penetrates the true nature of the Dhammas, because it allows us to see things very clearly, that we arise wisdom in our mind. And it is more than just intellectual understanding, right? When you study something through this, when you think about something, when you learn something, or even when you meditate, primarily thinking and learning, it may lead to intellectual understanding. But in order to transform that into wisdom, you have to transform it into transcendental wisdom. In other words, you have to really utilize meditation in order to get there, because by studying text is not alone will let you to wisdom, because it's just intellectual understanding. But until you know how to apply it and you can see the true nature of the Dhamma, that is when you transform intellectual understanding into transcendental wisdom. Okay? And here, by wisdom is meant learning for intellectual comprehension of the doctrine. So learning is intellectual comprehension, understanding of the doctrine, like scriptures, sutras. And by means of a rigorous course of scriptural study, usually at the feet of teachers, So this, the point of this is that one can learn and arise wisdom by following a guru, right? 善知识, Ting Ji Tuk, because of the proper guidance. And usually one would take refuge in an enlightened master, like usually in Tibetan Buddhism, right? They highly regard enlightened teachers, even more important than the Buddha, because it has a more direct impact to be studying with enlightened teachers. Because of the capabilities of the masters to provide proper guidance at each stage of the disciple's career, that these will provide adequate grounds for wisdoms to arise. When you have proper guidance, you can get to your destination more safely. Otherwise, even though a disciple succeeds in developing concentration through meditation, it will be no more use to him than a sharpened pencil to a man who can neither read nor write. Right? So you study meditation, but you don't know how to apply. You don't know how to know the way to transform that intellectual understanding into transcendental wisdom. That meditation practice is really of no use. As an example here, that you give a pencil, this great capability, this tool, to a person who does not read nor write, then he does not read, does not know how to write, then that is then it's useless. That tool is useless. So when we study even the scriptures, even meditation practice, but if we don't know how to apply, which today we'll talk about what can we do with wisdom, then it's nice to have, but it's not very useful. So knowledge stops short at conceptual symbols. Wisdom passes beyond them to comprehensions of realities. Right? Knowledge allows you to understand, but you cannot go beyond the symbols, the text, the words. But with wisdom, it goes beyond that. It transcends realities. But if the nature of that realization is to be communicated, then we will have to use the symbols. We'll have to use words to describe that. So even if you attain wisdom, you cannot disregard language. You have to use the language if you want to communicate that with other sentient beings. If you want to share what you learn with other sentient beings, with your friends, with those who have affinity with you, then you have to use language. So even though language will only give you intellectual understanding, but it is important. It is a tool if you know how to use it, and you need the tool in order to make your method more effective. Right. So there are three ways. Right? Three ways to learn, to uncover wisdom. One is through learning. Right. One is through contemplation. When you learn, you contemplate about it, and you practice to reinforce and to give substance to your learning. Right? Learning alone will only give you knowledge. You have to see the true nature in order to arrive at wisdom. And normally, through the traditional stage, you use wisdom in order to make the ground of your mind more fertile, more conducive to development of wisdom. Okay, so learning, contemplation, and practice. Okay. So there are two types of wisdom according to Master Ching Kong. One is true wisdom, and the one's influential wisdom. And according to Master Ching Kong in one of his lectures, he says that when you are presented with the enticement of fame and fortune, you have opportunity whether to subside or to arise to wisdom. And usually in the fame of fortune, if you have wisdom, then you can overcome its enticement. If you don't have the wisdom, then you won't be able to overcome. You succumb to the enticement. And overcoming fame and fortune here means that not seeking a self-serving agenda. When you do something, when people compliment you, 别人赞叹你, right? People compliment you, you don't cause rise to arrogance. If you cause rise to arrogance, then you have a self-serving agenda. But if you maintain a cool mind in observing the true nature, then you can easily overcome the enticement. And that will allow you to propagate the truth, the Dharma, for the benefits of all sentient beings. And here, how are we defining true wisdom and influential wisdom? According to Master Ching Kong, true wisdom here means as purity, right? Spiritual purity, sincerity, and equality. If we cultivate those characteristics, then we are nourishing the true wisdom of ours. For influential wisdoms, there are the enlightened mind, loving kindness, and compassion. Those characteristics are what Master Ching Kong used to describe influential wisdom. So when we encounter fame and fortune, it's very easy to be attracted to fame and fortune because it enhances our survival. Therefore, it's very difficult to escape. If we cannot overcome our ego, then we will succumb to the enticement of fame and fortune. And when we encounter the enticement of fame and fortune, and if there is self-serving agenda in us, meaning there's self-interest in us, then there will be no spiritual purity. There will be no sincerity, no equality. Right? You can see that with purity, because of greed, for example, because of wanting to have, that impurifies our mind, and we will not be sincere because we act with the self-serving agenda. And there will not be equality because there will be bias. We will want to have more of the benefits than other people, or the people who are related to us who can bring us benefits. We want to help them more than we want to help somebody else who may not bring us benefits. When there is attraction to fame and fortune, then there will be no true wisdom because of the lack of purity, sincerity, and equality. And when there is no true wisdom, there will not be influential wisdom, whereas that means no enlightened mind, no loving kindness, and no compassion. Right? So without compassion and loving kindness, there is no enlightenment. So the enlightenment and loving kindness, they go hand in hand. Then should there be any animosity, any hatred, any dislike in us against other people, then there is no compassion. When there's no compassion, no loving kindness, there's no enlightenment. Right? So the brief descriptions of the relationship between compassion and enlightenment and wisdom. So what can we do with wisdom? If we have true wisdom and we can practice, cultivate loving kindness, and we have wisdom, what can we do with it? I think that's more of an interesting question than just to have wisdom, because okay, well, you have wisdom, but what are you going to do with it? Well, several things we can do with wisdom. One is wisdom allows us to know, right? Because knowledge. To know what? To know it all. To know everything, to know everyone. So the question is it possible to know everything in the universe? And the answer is yes, but there are qualifications. Right? One needs to have the conditions to know everything. And that all-knowing knowledge has qualifications. And what is that qualification? Well, one qualification for the all-knowing knowledge is unlimited loving kindness towards everyone and everything. Right? So compassion, loving kindness, sympathy are the grounds for enlightenment. And here, I think this is very interesting here to note that the sole absolute value is compassion or loving kindness. Even wisdom is only a means for the realization of the supreme end. So when we study Buddhism, we try to achieve enlightenment, but really the purpose is to strengthen, to make our absolute, to make our compassion, loving kindness absolute, so that we can bring benefits to help other people. Because achieving enlightenment on our own is is not the end, but the end here is loving kindness and compassion. So then we should ask ourselves, what is it that prevents us from knowing people, what they're thinking? Right? What is it that prevents us from understanding everything and everyone? With everyone, with people, why is it that we cannot understand their thoughts? Well, maybe it's a way of protecting ourselves by not understanding other people's thoughts. Because if we lack the ability to understand other people's thoughts, it may be a good thing for us for the time being, because if we can see other people's thoughts and we don't have loving kindness and compassion, then it can lead to negative mindsets, right? Jealousy, right? We will see negative things about people and we will not be able to control our own afflictions. So if we lack the ability to know, it is because we lack one fundamental qualification, and that is loving kindness, right? 慈悲, right? 德悲. So unlimited loving kindness will qualify a person to have unlimited knowledge. So why is it so? Right? If we have loving kindness, then we really pay attention to those around us, and we pay attention to the grass that we walk on that we destroy. Right? We so carelessly pluck a flower without ever thinking how it will destroy the beauty of that environment because we feel like it, or we just think it's fun to do so. So when we do that, we are being careless, or we are not attentive to a person who may feel neglected next to us, and we may not have any regards for their feelings, and because of that we don't understand them, and because of that we don't have you can say acute level of loving kindness. So when we have loving kindness towards the new universe, then we are qualified to know about the universe. When we have loving kindness towards people, then we are qualified to know about them. One example that to help us understand this is from the Mahaparina Sutra, right? 大涅槃经, 跟大涅槃. In this sutra here, the Buddha was towards the end of his career, his life, and he was about to enter nirvana. And Ananda, his personal attendant, knew that the Buddha was going to enter nirvana in a matter of days or even hours. So he stood there trying to realize what was going on, and he was weeping bitterly, and he said to himself, the master is about to pass away from me. He is so kind. Right? These words, he is so kind, are of the greatest significance in Buddhism. Because Ananda spent 20 years serving the Buddha as his personal attendant. So he must have heard the Buddha deliver 100 discourses, witness all kinds of mystical teachings, or even abstruse, difficult, and very philosophical teachings. And he witnessed the Buddha answer thousands of questions, brilliant answers, and he was very approachable. And he even answered very difficult questions from challengers. And all the supernormal happenings around the Buddha. So he witnessed a lot during the 20 years of his serving the Buddha. And of all those wonderful qualities that the Buddha displayed, that Ananda witnessed, one thing that stood in his mind at the end of 20 years, at the end of the Buddha's career, was his kindness, the Buddha's kindness, right? So Ananda summed up all of his experience with the Buddha with these few words: he who is so kind. Right? So the Buddha at the end was really his compassion that stood out to Ananda, his closest personal attendant, who witnessed day and night of the happenings. Right? He was there every step of the way, wherever he was possible. He was closest to the Buddha than anybody else. But at the end of the day, he summed up what he experienced, what the Buddha could offer the world was his compassion, or loving kindness. And the Buddha knew it all, but at the end, the basis of that was he who is so kind, or his compassion. Buddha's loving kindness, Buddha's compassion was what allowed the Buddha to be who he was. So when we have loving kindness, we are qualified to understand what is it that we have loving kindness towards. So we have loving kindness towards the universe, then we are qualified to understand the universe. If we have loving kindness towards our friends and family, then we are qualified to understand them. And it's very natural for us to understand those who we care about. Not emotionally attached, but because you have this interest of caring about them that allows you to understand them more, right? Have you ever experienced that? That when you pay more attention to somebody, you're more attentive to them, you seem to know more about them than before that you had any caring about them. See, that caring allows you to pay more attention, and with the interest of helping them, then that allows you to develop the insight about them, right? So to know everything about people, for example, but without loving kindness, without compassion, we will end up focusing only on their mistakes and their faults. Because as human beings, nobody is perfect. And we are likely to have faults. People are going to have faults. And there are things that go on in people's minds that we don't understand. But if we can see their minds, see their thoughts, we would be horrified. And we would feel with afflictions, worries, anxieties, jealousies. Why are they thinking about me like that? As opposed to, why are they complimenting me? Oh, I must be good. So those things will just cause rise in our arrogance and doubts and all kinds of afflictions. And at the end, it will only hurt us. And maybe that's why nature is not allowing us to know other people's thoughts, because we have not matured to a level of understanding them. But as we progress and we start to understand people more, like true caring for them, then we start to understand them more and more, right? Without them speaking, we understand what they're thinking, what they want, right? So without loving kindness, if we see their mistakes and we see the darkness in their hearts, then what will happen? We're likely will start criticizing them, right? We start to focus only on their negative sides and thinking that that's all they are, just the negative side. So this is why we should not expose other people's faults, because it will be a reflection on us. It will cause us to commit to unskillful deeds. So those lacking compassion, sympathy for others, likely to jump into the bandwagon as well. When we criticize somebody and they also lack sympathy and compassion, they're likely to join in on the conversation and start criticizing other people. And the result is what? Arguments, vengeance, and suffering for the world. Right? So all-knowing knowledge without the four immeasurables, right? 四无量心, tứ vô lượng tâm. Then it becomes self-destructive with afflictions, right? Because when we have the ability to see other people's minds, but we don't have any loving kindness, we will be self-destructive. Okay. In Nikaya, there's a verse about how the mind could drive or eliminate suffering. The Buddha says that if the mind is accompanied by love, here's loving kindness. Thomas translates as love, but it's loving kindness. Then he will be free from hatred and malice. If the mind is accompanied by compassion, by sympathetic joy, by equanimity, 慈悲喜舍, like 德悲喜舍, the four immeasurables. When the mind is accompanied by the four immeasurables, then he will be free from hatred and malice. So the more that we cultivate loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and tranquility, the more that we are free from suffering, right? Hatred and malice. And so when we have this all-knowing knowledge but without compassion, it can be very dangerous. And in Dhammapada, verse 1, the Buddha says, mind perceives all knowables. All knowables here is all dhammas or all phenomena, fa or fab. The mind is the chief. Mind made are they. If with a corrupted mind one should either speak or act, dukkha follows caused by that, as does the will, the cox's hoof. So in this picture here, you can see that karma follows the person, the mind, whether it's happiness or suffering, it will follow just like the cart following the ox. So when our mind is accompanied by the four immeasurables, then we'll be free from all kinds of suffering, right? Just like the verse here. And in his book Sankarasita, he says that talk about good skillfulness and unskillfulness, ethics, or 戒, like 持戒, 戒, ethics. It's not antinomianism. Antinomianism is a belief that when you do something is because of God. You just believe. It's just a theory that you just believe and you don't have to do anything else. But here in Buddhism, is ethics, morality. It's not just because you believe, but it is psychologically connected. There is a connection, psychological connection between our thoughts and our deeds and our state of being. And it's not by chance. For example, it is not possible for a person to commit murder with a good heart, right? So in order for a person to do something very bad, there is a driving force behind it. Because when a person commits murder, there is with a deliberate mind to take a person's life, then the mind is dominated by hatred, by malice. And so when we do something, when we have loving kindness, then because our mind is already at peace, that's why we can causterize to loving kindness. And if we have all-knowing knowledge, but there is no loving kindness, then there is very likelihood of us hurting that person, taking advantage of them, because of the negative side because of the negativity in the mind, right? But if we have loving kindness and we cultivate that, and when we do something, automatically from our thoughts to our deeds, our actions, that there is a connection, and therefore it will be pushed by loving kindness, and the result will be skillful deeds. Deeds condense our thought, just like water condenses our air. So there's a natural connection, right? When there is enough moisture out of the air, there will be droplets of water. So same thing too, when we have a lot of negative air, a lot of unskillful thoughts, then what's going to happen is that unskillful deeds will condense out of the unskillful thoughts, right? So thoughts may manifest, proclaim from the housetops of actions only, already been committed in the silent and secret chambers of the heart. So when a person does a bad deed, they have already committed that bad deed in the heart for them to take that action, right? They have to think about it, they rationalize about it, they may talk about it, and when they take action, then they have, it's not that they committed an error, fault when they are taking action, but they have already committed. Just like those suicidal notes, right? They have already written notes, they have already thought about it before they took action. And so it's not that a person violates the precepts or has committed a fault when that person does something, but that person has already committed a fault through that thinking, that contemplations of the negativity, contemplations of that evil deed. And conversely, when we have purified and radiant consciousness, then it is not possible for us to produce unskillful thoughts and skillful deeds. We will not be able to commit any such act. Right? If we have our mind cultivated with loving kindness, then there is no way for us to act unskillfully. So if we have loving kindness and we understand that person, then it is not possible for us to hurt them. But if we try to care for somebody without loving kindness, then it's easy for us to hurt them. So without loving kindness, compassion, sympathy, and tranquility, 慈悲喜舍, right? To be hisa, then that all-knowing knowledge can be self-destructive. What I want to emphasize here is that when we cultivate loving kindness, we will be driven because of the ground that we have prepared for ourselves. It will grow the flowers based on the seeds that we sow. And when we cultivate loving kindness, it will force us to do good deeds to help others. And what will happen is that we will cultivate merits. And that allows us to have sharper intuitions. And therefore, it helps to increase the understanding, the wisdom. And so wisdom here is not automatic, but it requires cultivation. We need to put in our own efforts in order to achieve the wisdom. So it's not that you observe the precepts, and then you sit in meditation, and then automatically you have wisdom. It's not automatic. That process is not automatic. It's very manual, in fact. You have to put in effort in order to uncover the wisdom. It does not come automatically. And of course, and with tranquility, 舍 or sa, tranquility here is that should there be opportunity, affinity, yuan, yin, should there be affinity to help others, we will help others. Otherwise, we let go. And there is no egoistic attachment. There's no agenda say, I need to help that person in order to achieve my goal. If you have an opportunity, then you help them. So here's an example of how Shankaracita, when he was visiting Lumbini, which was the place where the Buddha was born, how he observed how that place has degraded. It's just so sad that the original place of the Buddha's birth is now a place where nobody really cares about. It's just so Lumbini here was desolate and neglected in appearance of such a sacred place. And one time when he was visiting with his friends in Lumbini, on the evening of their arrival, the police inspector turned up with 20 of his men, and soon the peace and silence of the place were lost in uproar. So they created just a lot of excitement. And the masters was busy squeezing money from the local landlords. And some of the inspector's men slaughtered a goat, and without removing their hair, they just threw it into an open fire and cooked it. And seeing this gruesome sight of five men of a little party could have only 5 people versus 20 people, they wanted to make a strong protest. But on reflection, they decided not to do so because the police inspector had been drinking since early morning, and to judge from the way in which he was behaving with the landlords, he was not the sort of person who would be amenable to reason. And so when we try to help somebody with a compassionate heart, and if they're not going to listen, then we better wait. We should wait. It'd be easier to wait than try to force our thinking onto them. So if there's opportunity, even though we're Buddhists and we are very much excited about sharing the Dharma with other people, but there is no opportunity, we should not be so egoistically attached to that motive. Otherwise, it will become really a motive, some sort of a self-serving agenda to convert people, right? So he said that it is kind of sad that how the first precept was violated, in the very birthplace of the Buddha. So Lumbini Buddhism was destroyed a long time ago in Buddha, in the 11th, 12th century, right? When Muslims and those extremists, they came in, they totally destroyed it, they took over. And so the birthplace of the Buddha, such a sacred place, and India overall, I mean, Buddhism does not have a strong presence in India presently. But I think in a way that it shows the strength of Buddhism in a sense that it can flourish outside of its original place, meaning it's really independent of place and time. If there's a need for peace, if there's a need for liberation, there's a need for happiness, then there is Buddhism. So Buddhism is very survivable in from that sense, right? So when loving kindness, compassion, sympathy, and tranquility are perfect, then one becomes a Buddha. One is qualified to understand everything and everyone, right? The second thing that we can do with wisdom is to become a Buddha with wisdom, and that is to have it all, right? To have merits, virtues, and wisdom. So what does it take to have unlimited merits, virtues, and wisdom? Well, the qualification is that one needs to know how to let go, right? To become non-attached. So that's the basic qualification. And we should evaluate ourselves. Based on this, we should reflect from the time that we have studied Buddhism to now. We should ask ourselves, how much have we learned to let go? And I don't mean to let go irresponsibly, but in our heart, how much do we have non-attachment? And how much can we, if need be, let go of things? I think it's an important question to ask ourselves from time to time. But if we're still greedy for wealth and seeing it's the utmost important things on earth, then we're not making very much progress, and that we won't be able to be qualified for that ultimate wisdom. Where Master Chin Kung says that from the past to the present, many have been corrupted by fame and fortune, and they have fallen from their pedestals, from the heights of their career, right? The heights of their empire, their accomplishments. And they have fallen because they have succumbed to the enticements of fame and fortune. Master Chin Kung said that fame and fortune, however, are not evil. Fundamentally, they're not evil. It's how one uses them. Right? Just like money. Money is neither good nor bad. It's how you use money. So fame and fortune could be used to propagate Buddhism and to bring benefits to others. So how do we know that we are qualified to pursue fame and fortune? How do we know that we are suitable to have fame and fortune? Well, one way to measure that is the more that we have non-attachment, the more that we are qualified to have fame and fortune. If we find ourselves with attachment, then we should minimize fame and fortune. And with the practice of non-attachment, when it becomes second nature, and we're no longer influenced by greed, anger, and delusion, where it would not stir up when we interact with people, when we see things, that we don't get stirred up and form the egoistic attachment in our hearts. and that we can prevent ourselves from deviating from our goal, right? And goal in studying Buddhism, and a goal of not being corrupted, then we are making progress, and that we are forming non-attachment. So letting go here doesn't mean that you just simply give away what you have, or just to let go irresponsibly. That's not what I mean. I don't mean on the physical sense that you just let go, but it's more of spiritually that you let go, that you can feel at ease when things change, that you're not attached to, you're not fixated to things being the way they are permanently, but should things change, that you can evolve with those things. So the purpose of letting go is to eliminate greed and egoistic attachment. But when you give away stuff, it doesn't mean that you just randomly give away or irresponsibly give away. We need to give with wisdom. It's very telling whether we have wisdom or not. We can tell that based on how we view things. Right? For example, in his book Shankaracita, he says that, and this is also described in the precepts as well, that when we give, we should give courteously to those in need. When we give to somebody, we should give with a kind heart and not to look down on them, with respect, right? And with happiness, with joy. When we give, we should give with joy and happiness. And we should give away anything that is needed to help others. So this condition is important and essential. So the donor should be even happier than the recipient, and should not repent for his generosity, should not feel sorry for giving, and should not regret in his giving, and should not talk about his charitable deeds. Like, don't boast ourselves, don't compliment, say, you see how much I have given, you see how much I have helped others. Every year I helped so many people. So a bodhisattva would not talk about his charitable deeds. And a bodhisattva would give quickly with a humble heart. And when there is an urgent need, we should give. And there's no distinction between friends and enemies, undeserving or deserving, wicked or righteous. And what that means here is that those who have done us wrong, for example, in the past, they may be undeserving of our giving. But should they need help, if it's a life-threatening situation, then we should help that person just like we should help our friends alike. Right? So when they need support, and they really need support in a dire situation, then there is no differentiation. But in a normal sense, if you see a person who he's on the street buying cocaine, buying drugs, and he doesn't have enough cash, we shouldn't give him cash to allow him to buy, to buy drugs. So we should have that differentiation in that sense. But let's say that if he's being injured, and in order for his wounds to be healed, he has to pay the medical expense, we should be happy to cover the medical expense for him, for example, in order to help him. So he may be undeserving because he's using drugs, but in a dire situation, we should treat him equally as if we would treat our friend. A bodhisattva is prepared to sacrifice even his own life if needed. But of course, it doesn't mean that you give your life irresponsibly, because life is precious. So he exercises discretion, though, right? He does not supply anybody with the means to indulge in lust and cruelty, or use in contraventions of the precepts, against the precepts for them to violate. We should not facilitate people to violate the precepts. So when we give, we should give with wisdom. So whatever the bodhisattva gives away should have been acquired by honest means, right? Legally and morally, right? He is no Robin Hood who plunders the rich to provide to the poor, or a financial wizard creating and mammoth charitable trust out of their ill-gotten gains of the career of legalized robbery and exploitation. Right? So that's not giving, that's impure wealth that he has acquired. So, but more, I think, also important is to understand the motive of our giving. Why are we giving? Are we giving for self-gain, or are we giving really to try to help other people? Right? Or are we giving for the sake of acquiring merits? Are we giving because we want to earn merits? 人天福报, right? nhân thiên phúc báo. Or are we giving to earn merits? Or are we giving to gain individual emancipation for all liberations? But simply solely for the sake of bringing enlightenment to our sentient beings? Are we giving them because we want to help provide opportunities for them to eventually find a way to enlightenment? Right? Practice is dissociated from prana, or wisdom. Border, bhagya, prana is said to be mundane. But when we associate a giving with wisdom, then it is transcendental. And it is a practice of transcendental perfection of giving that dana, paramita, bushu, bolomi, right? Boti balama, dana is giving. So when we give with wisdom, then our giving is perfect. In other words, the definition for perfect giving is that we're not attached to ourselves giving. We're not attached to the gift that we're giving. And that we're not attached, meaning that we don't see the people who need, look down on them, or we need a return. We want return from them. So the difference between transcendental and mundane giving is because of wisdom or not wisdom. And here in this Perfect Wisdom Sutra, Sarupatra asks Supati, right, how do you differentiate between worldly and super mundane perfection of giving? He said that the worldly perfection is a person who gives liberally to all those who ask. There's no differentiation. But he thinks in terms of real things, that this is real, this is my hard work, right? This money, this wealth here is from my hard work, it's very precious. So you should use it carefully. And that I give, this is the gift. So that he sees those things as real. Whereas super mundane is that consists of threefold purity that does not apprehend self, recipient, nor gift, and also no reward, no expectation, no expectations of merits even. And he dedicates that gift to supreme enlightenment. He gives because of wanting sentient beings to achieve enlightenment, wanting all to achieve enlightenment. And he does not apprehend any enlightenment, meaning he doesn't do it for himself. So here is that we should give with wisdom, right? Even so, for us to become, to have it all, we should have the willingness to give it all. But to give it all doesn't mean to give irresponsibly, but to give with wisdom. And the third thing that we could do with wisdom is freedom, to achieve freedom, right? With wisdom, we can achieve freedom. And what is the qualification for having that freedom, for being free? Well, one qualification for freedom is morality, right? Until we have a strong foundation of morality, one should not have the freedom to do whatever one wants. It's very dangerous to have freedom without morality. Because morality is what? Essentially, it's responsibility. Right? Having the freedom without morality, a person would not feel responsible for exercising his or her power. And eventually, that will lead to corruption. For example, like freedom of the internet, right? When we are on the internet, there is freedom of looking for whatever we want. There are unlimited contents on the internet. And of course, there's goodness to it too. Like if you want to do research, you can easily look for your the information without having spending too much time. Before, you would have to dig through tons of books in the library in order to get the information. But now, with the highway information on the internet so freely available that you can access without much of time and much of effort. But of course, there are dark sides to the internet as well, right? If you don't have that responsibility, don't have that strong ground of morality, you will be enticed by the negative contents. All right. And I'm sure you are all aware of all the negative contents that we don't need to spend much time on. So there is responsible in our learning. When we want to achieve wisdom, there should be some responsible learning. And what does that mean? What that means here is that when we learn Buddhism, we should not just pick and choose what we like, but it will be more safe to have a strong ground and a well-rounded understanding of Buddhism. And we should be familiar, or at least study, or at least be familiar with Theravada, the Pali Canon, at least. And there could be translations in Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan, or Mongolian, or Vietnamese. Those translations are closer to the, even though we don't know Pali, but we can learn from those translations. And to attempt to understand the special teachings, like very special teachings like Zen, right, Shin, or some other schools, but without first understand thoroughly the common ground within Buddhism, then it's more likely for a person to end up in disaster. Buddhism is nowadays by no means wanting in students, especially Western students, who not content with the spacious staircases that lead from the lower to the higher stories of the palace of the Dharma, hastily scramble up the tree of their own intellect and try to leap therefrom headlong through the windows of one of the topmost towers. They cut themselves on the broken glass and crash onto the ground. So when we have access to enormous amount of information on the internet, and we don't have a strong ground, a strong foundation, then we think that we understand it, and we would neglect the fundamental teachings like precepts. Like a lot of students will study Zen, meditation, without studying precepts, without caring for the precepts, morality. And so without morality, there's no strong ground, there's no strong foundation. And the higher you go, but your foundation is weak, and what's going to happen? It's going to fall, it's going to topple, right? And so here he says that it is important to be surrounded or to accompany a teacher, especially a living master, as opposed to an imaginary one or one who speaks from the other side, right? Your imagination of whatever schools. So when we are on the top and we fall, the higher we go without strong foundation, we can fall and hurt ourselves. Okay. So that's what I mean by learning, be responsible in our learning, right? We want to have wisdom, but there should be a way to sustain that rise. Otherwise, we can fall because there's no strong foundation. The fourth thing that we can do with wisdom is to seek non-attachment to the world. It's very free to be not attached to the world because there's no obligation. But it is possible to feel not obligated to do anything. But what is the qualification? Well, to be completely free and become detached from the world, one should take on this responsibility of the world. So it's not very easy to be completely free because we live our lives and we depend on so many people. Just a simple breakfast that we have, requires so much support of the world, right? I mean, just a simple bowl of cereal, there is so much effort, so much support from the world in that simple bowl of cereals. If we want to enjoy that bowl of cereal freely, non-attached, then there needs to be something to substantiate that, right? And that is responsibility. When we have the responsibility, then we can be non-attached. So when we will fulfill our responsibilities to the greater extent, then we are allowed the feeling, the state of non-attachment. So until our responsibilities are fulfilled, being detached from life, right, will make a person more complacent to the world. If you don't have responsibility and you want to be detached, then you are forcing that severance. You cut off your attachment. And what's going to happen is that you will feel complacent. You will feel 自满, right? 得满. You will feel very complacent because you stop caring. You stop wanting to know about the world, wanting to care about the world. And you will also lose your sense of loving kindness and sympathy for the world. And that you could become insensitive to the sufferings of others. So it may lead a person to feel alienated, right? You force yourself to be cut off from the world. What's going to happen is that you will feel complacent and you feel alienated. And it becomes a superficial indifference, not allowing one to fully experience life. So a person without loving kindness when a person without loving kindness but wants to be detached from the world, it can lead to alienation. But what we learn in Buddhism is to become non-attached. But what does that mean? Non-attached does not mean in a negative sense. I guess in Shankaracita's book, he translates aloba, which literally means no greed, but he translates no attachment. But he has a good way of explaining what that means. When we practice Buddhism, we don't become cold-blooded, and that we become detached. But detached here is that to detach from the compounded existence, from the three worlds, right? The triple worlds, the worlds of desire, worlds of formed, and the world of no form, right? San jie, tam giới, sắc giới, vô sắc giới, dục giới, sắc giới, vô sắc giới. So san jie is yu jie, se jie, and wu se jie, right? Those three worlds. And according to this commentary, the mind-only commentary, the Sita is only influenced, it remains detached from an uninfluenced when it is encountering covetousness, meaning that the nature of the mind in the state of in the three worlds, that it's not attached to the enjoyment of the three worlds. So non-attachment here can sound purely negative, but it is very positive of a mental state, very positive mental state. And non-attachment here is not a sort of bloodless lack of interest, but it is very positive in a sense that, in a sense of being selective and being conscious of what one is doing and what is skillful and what is positive. That is one attached to. So what does that mean is that one is able to become non-attached is because one has so-called found something better, right? If you force yourself to become detached, then it creates a lot of pressure because you're being forced to give up something that you like. and therefore it can be painful, and you might not be willing to give up. But if you can find something else better in its place, then it's very easy to let go. So when you have found something better in its place, that means you have options, right? When you have options, it's very easy to be able to let go what is less value than what you already have. So this is why non-attachment is meritorious, because it allows you to let go what is not skillful and to maintain what is skillful and what is positive. So non-attachment is, a person with non-attachment is serene, confident, and balanced in oneself, because you have what you need. There's no need for you to be attached to something that's extra, right? For example, if you're already full, you have just eaten, there is no need for you to compete with others for food because you are already balanced. But if you don't have a full stomach, you have an empty stomach, then it's very easy to be enticed by the great smell of the food, for example. So when you are balanced, you are serene, you are calm, you are confident, then that is a state of non-attachment, very balanced. Does it make sense? So one does not need to reach out to make one feel better. You don't need to go out and procure something in order to make you feel better, because you are already balanced. You already feel fulfilled. One has the confidence and the wider visions to be free from being neurotically involved with things, right? Neurotic craving is the kind of craving that you're doing something to satisfy that craving and not because you need it. For example, neurotic craving with eating or shopping is like you have tons of clothes at home, but you just feel the need to go out and buy some more. Or you're already full, but you feel the need to eat more chocolate, or you want to satisfy the craving. It becomes neurotic. But there's nothing wrong with buying clothes. There's nothing wrong with eating chocolate. It becomes a problem when you are feeding that craving because of the need, not because of the want, and not necessarily the need. So non-attachment here means self-contained, self-aware, and very objective, responsible, and sensitive, right? Being non-attached doesn't mean you don't care, but there is a sense of responsibility. So these qualities here are developed in conjunction with responsibility and concerns for others. So when we learn Buddhism and we uncover wisdom, we feel happy about our state of being, but it doesn't mean that we don't care. That happiness comes from responsibility, comes from the concerns for others. And so when we want to become detached from the world, we want to feel detached from the world, we should fulfill our responsibility. That's the qualification for us to feel on top of the world and detached and free from the obligations from the world, is to fulfill our responsibility. Having loving kindness is more valuable than liberation, because loving kindness is the core of Buddhism, right? We try to achieve liberation, but if we don't cultivate loving kindness, then we are missing the point. And here, Sankaracita explains a little bit more. In the four immeasurables, right? 四有量心, 慈悲喜舍, 都无能贪, 得为喜舍. Love here is really loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And why loving kindness is fundamental. Without loving kindness, these three things will fall apart. Without loving kindness, compassion will turn into contempt. When you help somebody, you look down on them, right? That's contempt. You think, oh, how poor you are, how pitiful you are. Here, I have some money, take some money. Without loving kindness, compassion will turn into contempt. Without loving kindness, sympathetic joy will turn into vicarious satisfaction, meaning that there's joy in it, but it's not yours. You're borrowing it. vicarious satisfaction, vicarious experience is when you experience something through other people, not yourself. An example, parents who encourage their children to take up after-school sports, for example, and they feel very joyful in wanting their kids to play sports, but they themselves don't play sports, but they force themselves. And even the kids refuse to play sports, they continue to encourage, and that is because maybe they quit sports early in their childhood and they regret, and they want to see their kids playing sports. And when they see their kids playing sport, they feel joyful. That is vicarious, because that joy comes from, not from them, but through their children playing sports. When we see somebody giving and we feel joyful, and if we don't have loving kindness, then we are not experiencing that joy for ourselves, but we are borrowing the conditions. And it may be joyful, but it's not your own, because sooner or later, whatever that you borrow, you will have to return it. So in other words here is that we have to practice loving kindness, and we should do the giving ourselves. Otherwise, we will live vicariously, right? We're living that joy, but that joy is not ours. We're living it through somebody else. That's vicarious satisfaction. Does it make sense? Right. And then without loving kindness, equanimity turns into heartless indifference. Because equanimity is peace. You don't worry about anything else. You just let go. So without loving kindness, when you let go, it becomes heartless indifference. You don't care. You stop caring. Right? So without loving kindness, the peace that you have turns into just uncaring attitude. Right? Wisdom, you don't need to observe the precepts, 持戒. So the qualification for that is that skillfulness has to be your natural expressions in your life. Your entire life, every waking moment, is all skillfulness. When you have the skillfulness and you have wisdom, you don't need to observe the precepts. You don't need to follow any rules, right? But of course, we need to understand what that means. An arhat is beyond good and evil. That's why an arhat does not need to observe the precepts. But it is only in a sense of transcending the wholesome volitions. Your attitude, your thinking, your intention has to be wholesome, has to be skillful. So not in a sense of being capable of both virtuous and sinful acts. So there is a difference between sila of an arhat, the precepts of morality of an arhat, versus morality of an ordinary person. Right? It's not about just the difference in degree, perfect one or imperfect one, but morality of an arhat is the spontaneous outward expression of an emancipated mind. That person is free from affliction, free from greed, anger, and delusion. Whereas for us mundane beings, when we observe the precepts, it is because of disciplinary observance. We're trying to control ourselves. We're restricting ourselves in order to not violate. But for them, it's a natural expression of what they, of how they are. For example, like a poem. A poem is an embodiment of a certain mood, right? When you write a poem, in expressions of your feelings, your emotions, and it captures you. A poet passes from intensely felt emotion to its embodiment in imagery, rhythm, and words. Whereas when we read a poem, we're the reader reading a poem, we are doing in the reverse order. We take the product and we read the poem, we feel inspired. Whereas the poet, because of his inspiration, that he turns his inspirations into poem. Where on the other side, we take the inspirations and we read it and we see the poems. So morality here is like a poem. Um, which makes intelligible the secrets of spirituality. In other words, those who are sages, who have happiness, who have joy, it is because of their morality, how they live a very moral life. And when we see the mysteries of their happiness, that mystery is explained with morality. Does it make sense? So we understand the secrecies, the mysteries of their happiness, their sagehood. Their expression is through morality, how they live their lives. Just like the poem, when we see in order to understand the poet's inspiration, we read their poems. For same thing too, for us to understand the sages, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, their state of being, we emulate them. We pretend to be like them by observing the precepts. Does that make sense? So when we observe the precepts, we are essentially emulating sages, Buddha, Bodhisattvas. Just like we cannot write poems ourselves because we don't have that inspiration. But if we continue to read the poems of inspired poets, then eventually we will know how to write our own poems. So when we, even though it may be restricted at hands, but when we observe the precepts, we are turning ourselves slowly, changing ourselves into sages. And it will become second nature when we behave properly. Does that make sense? Right? And the reason for that is because our conduct, our actions influence our mind. When we behave, even though we may not have pure mind, but we are very careful with our actions, then eventually we can influence our mind and to make it pure. For example, like an angry person will instinctively grasp a stick, whereas a person with loving kindness will likely to compliment than to criticize, right? So when the mind is deep in meditation, it automatically relaxes the body, the eyes close, and the body becomes rigid and not slouching. It's the same thing when we sit in meditation, we keep our back straight, our elbows out, and we try to not be distracted by our wandering thoughts. Then we are emulating a meditative state. And eventually, what's going to happen is that the body will relax as well. The mind will relax, the body will relax. And same thing, when you relax the body, you relax the mind. And when you relax the mind, you feel free and light in the body, right? So even though we cannot absorb in meditation, but our postures, when we sit properly, we have good breathing path in our lungs. We feel comfortable. When we feel comfortable, we calm down the mind, right? We can concentrate the mind. So we may be at the beginning stage of learning meditation, but because we know that the body can influence the mind, therefore we force, in a way, the body to relax. And when we can relax the body, then the mind will be more conducive to meditation. So sila, precepts, it's not an end in itself, but a means of weakening the unwholesome states. So when we observe the precept, it's not the end. That's not the goal, is not to be restricted. But the goal here is to weaken that unwholesome state, unskillful state of mind. Does that make sense? So when we observe the precepts, we are weakening the bad state of mind that we had in the past. Morality is indispensable stepping stone to meditation. Morality is important, but it's not the end. We should not understand that morality, meditation, and wisdom is like a staircase, right? The staircase, you know how you staircase, right? You step up, and this is step one, and this is the end. There's no more of a staircase. We should not think morality, 三学, 戒定慧, right? Tam học giới định tuệ. We should not think of morality, meditation, and wisdom as like a staircase where when you step on this step, you're no longer on this, meaning you don't need it anymore. When you step on the third one, you don't need the last two anymore. That's not what it means. That doesn't mean that when you are successful in meditation that you don't need morality anymore. Or when you are successful, when you have uncovered your wisdom, that you don't need morality anymore. We should not think as step by step like that, but rather we should think of it as like a circle. Every time that we improve something, we are expanding the circle. We are expanding the circle. There's no beginning, no end, because our wisdom will help us to see clearly. We know what's wrong, what's right, and that will drive us to improve our morality. And when we observe morality and the body is calm, the mind will come and we can concentrate easier. And when we can concentrate, then we can see things clearly. That will increase the wisdom. So we should think of as a expanding circle, like the flower that grows, right? And not step by step. But morality is important because it helps to weaken the unwholesome state of mind. And that is the normal path. The normal path is to cease all evils and to learn to do good deeds, right? 断一切恶，修一切善, right? 斷tất cả ác, tu tất cả thiện. When we end all evil, it's much easier to do good deeds because there's no mixture of bad and good. Otherwise, you don't have. This allows us to have good preparation for goodness, for skillfulness. So the significance of morality resides principally in the fact that without the good life for basis, the state of superconsciousness, the state of concentrated mind, is very difficult to attain. So without morality, without a good life, without a peaceful life, it's very difficult to study, to learn, to practice meditation, and to uncover wisdom. Okay, so let's sum it up. Where what we've talked about, how we use morality, use wisdom. With wisdom, we can know it all, right? Know everything and know everyone. And the qualification is unlimited loving kindness, because without loving kindness, and if we know everything and everyone, then they can be self-destructive, because we will only focus on the negative side, right? People's bad behavior, bad thoughts, and it will be self-destructive because we will hurt ourselves. To be non-attached is to have it all. If you're willing to let it go, then you are qualified to have it all. If you can let go of fame and fortune, then you are qualified to have fame and fortune. Morality is the basis of freedom. We want to live a free life. We want to be free in accessing anything and everything. Then there should be a strong foundation of morality. Loving kindness is more important than liberation. Right? That's the whole fundamental of Buddhism is compassion, loving kindness. Right? Ananda, after 20 years of serving the Buddha, he summed up by the words that he, the Buddha, who is so kind, right? In spite of observing all the supernormal happenings of the Buddha, but to him, the best thing that he remembered the Buddha was for his loving kindness. So therefore, loving kindness is even more important than liberation. And lastly is that the natural expression of our skillfulness and loving kindness is observing precepts. So if you don't want to observe the precepts and you want to have wisdom, then you just have to have skillfulness and loving kindness as your natural expressions. Okay. Any comments? All right. All right, let's do merit dedication. If you could please join me together, fold your hands. May the merits and virtues accrue today adorn the Buddha Pure Lands, repay 4 types of kindness above, and aid those suffering in the paths below. May those who see and hear of this bring forth the resolve for the Bodhi mind. When this retribution body is complete, together we shall meet in the land of ultimate bliss.